Thank you very much. I'm an optimist, as most of you have listened to my iron ore analysis in the previous Indabas knows. And I'm not one by birth, but by analyzing facts. And I think this illustration of a bandwagon really, that is not only an illustration of the successes of the Mining Indaba conference, which I'd like to congratulate Jonathan Moore on that, but also I think it could become a picture of the African exploration scene in the future. I'd like to take a bit of a long-term perspective and start with just presenting the background facts of mining sector in the world, and use that in my later part of my presentation as a point of comparison. Africa accounts for roughly 10% of the value of all metals produced in the world. It's one of the smaller regions, together with Europe, only 2.5% there. But if we go back 25 years, Africa accounted for almost or double that, 20%. Europe was also double. So those are two regions that have really declined over this 25 years of mining development. If we look at the details of the value of production of the different countries in Europe, we see here how South Africa dominates that quite considerably, 4.6% of the total world. And then there are a number of countries such as Zambia, Ghana, and then declining. And in last year, Mali was the last one at 0.25, 0.26% of the total production of the world. If we look at the development over time, we can see here how Africa accounts, as I said, roughly for 10%. That's about $80 billion US, a fast growth over the past couple of years. But if we take the long-term trend, we can see here, and that's the bottom red curve, how Africa's share of global mine production has actually slowly decreased over these decade I'm showing here. And we see also how South Africa has stabilized. It accounts roughly for half of the value of mine production in Africa. And these figures as a point of departure for comparison. I'd like to talk about the African exploration. That's a mine theme, but I'll also go into some of the political developments which I think affects these, a look into the future, and a few conclusions. The raw materials group has already been presented. I'd like to mention that a year ago we merged with Intierra out of Australia, and we are now with worldwide activities and offices. African exploration has been fairly stable over a number of years. It's even been declining a bit, but we can see there between 2011 and 2012 a growth. These 14–15%, that's equal to roughly $2.6 billion US spent on exploration in Africa. If we go into some details, the lower part of the bars here is the African share of total exploration activity. Here we count the number of projects. And you can see gold is the most important, followed by copper. And the rest is dwarfed in this scale. But if we exclude those two, we can see here how also diamonds, gemstones, including diamonds, account for a large share of African project activities, gemstones as well. If we look at the percentage of total world here, we see that Africa is really outstanding when it comes to PGMs. 50% of the world's PGM projects are in Africa. Likewise on diamond and gemstones, almost 45% there. Mineral sands, 20%. Important in more than in general in those areas. If we look at the projects of the world in definitive feasibility stage, we have 616 on our databases. 102 of those are in Africa, and that equals to 17% of the projects at that stage. And that's a percentage which is much higher than the 10% Africa accounts for in terms of production today. In my view, that indicates great potential, one of the reasons why I'm optimistic. Likewise, if we go further and look at projects under construction, we have 290 of those in the databases. Africa accounts for 47, that's 16%. So that's also another figure underpinning my optimism here. If we go a bit into detail, here we are, and looks at the drilling activities, this is a picture of projects that we have in our databases which have reported drilling activities. And we grouped them here, the blue one, black one, gold is the yellow, of course, and copper. We see that 58% of the projects that reported drilling activities in 2010 were in gold, 14% copper, and other represented 27%. If we go to 2011, the number of projects increased by 26% to 200 from 100 and let me see what the figure, 168 in 2010, while the proportions between gold, copper and others remain more or less the same. And if we go to 2012, we see how the number of projects increased further to 239. Not such a strong growth as in between 2010 and 2011, but still a healthy growth from a much higher level. What we can see also from this picture is there are a number of regions which are highly favored. It's West Africa, not so surprisingly, but perhaps also it's interesting to note how activities up in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and that area has increased. Also in southern Africa, outside of South Africa, and in the Cameroon area in the bay there. What is also interesting to note, and partly that is probably because we don't have the full information, but there is no activity reported from Angola. I think Angola is a country which has a lot of potential, which is completely underutilized, underestimated, so to say. We can go into and drill into more details. These are quarterly drilling reports or reports of drilling activity. You can't really see this so well, but the bottom blue part, that's Africa. And we see how over these numbers, these are from 2010 and forwards. The reason why the bar to the far right there is so small, it's only the beginning of the quarter we have reported here. But you see how there was a peak in drilling activity at the end of 2011, early 2012. And the number of copper projects have slowly increased and is now between 40 and 50. Sorry, I was talking about copper. Here is the copper, and here is the gold again, where the number of projects around 100 has been fairly constant, while we also here see a peak in activity in the end of 2011, early 2012. And if we look at the others, which include mostly iron ore, uranium, vanadium, and others, we see a similar pattern with a peak there, but a fairly slow increase in activities over this period of time. What are the results then? We can look at the African gold resource base here, and if we add it all up here, it's almost 1,000 million ounces, 974 to be exact. Out of this, that's the South African part. The rest of Africa has 650 million ounces, together 1,620 million ounces. And in that little blue detail, you see how the rest of the resources are fairly well distributed in West Africa, mainly. If we look at what stage these resources are in, we can see here these are countries except South Africa. South Africa has 50% of the resources in the inferred category, while the other countries have roughly 40%. And Ghana dominates here, and you can see for yourself the rest of the list there. If we look at iron ore, the figure, the map I showed you earlier is here more quantified, and we see how Sierra Leone has 4 billion tons of iron ore in the resource base, followed by Guinea, Liberia, etc., at a slightly lower, but still to around 2,000 million tons of resources. To look a bit more at the dynamics, and I think this shows the variety and the width of African development. These are the first resource estimate made in 2012, and if you look at the gold there, it is several countries more or less on the same level, demonstrating the breadth in development. On the copper side, it's also interesting to note that here is Namibia, Botswana, countries that I haven't touched upon earlier are doing quite good in copper here. Similar type of picture, I picked here silver. Once again, that's a project in Botswana. And on the zinc side, we see how recent developments in South Africa. So where from do the funds for these exploration efforts come? We've looked at that and tried to analyze it by listing where is the primary listing for these companies. And you can see here, in this case on the copper side, the North American interests account for 22% of the number of companies active, Australian origin 28%, and Europe 13%. On the gold side, the North American dominance is even higher, 35%. That's mostly out of Canada, but not only. Australian companies 26%, and Europe again some 10% of the projects. What is notable here is that there are very few Chinese, and even if we assume that all the white spots are private investors that we can't locate so easily, even if all of those were from China, that's far from a sort of a takeover. Similar picture for iron ore and the PGMs. What is interesting here is to note that the European interests in iron ore are much higher than in the previous copper-gold example, accounting for 26%. And while North America and Australia are strong both on iron ore and platinum group. But also, please note that in the PGM sector, the number of companies based in Africa is dominating. So there is a strong African hold possibly into this industry. 38% of the projects are based in African countries. So to summarize a bit the exploration scene here, I would like to say that we see a stabilizing situation of activities in exploration in Africa, possibly a growth, as I said, with a bit of optimistic view and based on some of the metal price forecasts that we heard earlier, I think that we will see an increase. I'll get back to that also. Gold, copper are the major commodities in focus, but also the PGMs, gold and diamonds are areas where Africa is stronger than in general in the world. We also see how South African dominance is declining. They're gradually losing their grip, so to say, on the African mining scene. West Africa is definitely a new growth node, and the funding for this mostly comes from Australia and North America. China is not at all the threat that it could become. I'll discuss that a bit more detail very soon. And finally, it all very clearly shows that there is a large untapped geological potential on which to apply a lot of more exploration efforts in Africa. Let me move then to the political initiatives that we see, and I'd like first to discuss a bit about Chinese initiatives, and then talk a bit about African initiatives, and finally a few words about European Union and what they are up to there in Brussels. Is China taking over Africa? I've already answered this question, but I'd like to go into a few details here, and I think that it could actually be very interesting to have a more, that was discussed yesterday on the China Day, but the Chinese quest for minerals and metals could really become an important driving force in Africa, provided that the Chinese entrance is regulated and controlled by national governments. If we look at the facts, the Chinese foreign expansion is very slow, it's not continuous, and I would say that there is, if you look at the number of mines operating in Africa which are being controlled by Chinese, very limited number, not at all the dominance that you might think, at least when you read newspapers in US and North America and Europe. And I think a very important reason for this is simply that the structure of Chinese mining industry, the structure of Chinese mines is such that they don't have a lot of experience and technology suitable to large-scale exploitation, which would be the case, for example, in West African iron ore. You know, the average Chinese iron ore mine is a small operation, perhaps producing a few 100,000 tons only. That's not to say that there isn't technology in China, but it is not as widespread as is necessary to move ahead on a large scale in Africa. And on top of that, of course, there is a growing political hesitance from African leaders. But make no mistake, it will increase in the future. It's only a matter of time here. And the long-term security of supply to the Chinese will remain a serious political and economic problem for many years to come. And it would have been interesting to have a little bit of a discussion with Rick on the super cycle and the price into the future. I think he underestimated the supply constraints, which are growing continuously all the time. Turning to African initiatives here, Africa Mining Vision is the African Union's model for the future, and that has materialized into an African Mineral Development Center, which will start later this year. It will be based in Addis in Ethiopia, and it will be hosted by the Commission of the African Union, the African Development Bank, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. This is intended as a center to facilitate and serve as a model for developments in all parts of Africa on demand from national governments. The proposed budget for this center is $60 million for an initial 5-year period, which isn't a lot, but there are, in parallel to this, and which has been discussed this morning and also yesterday, other initiatives, as you are all probably well aware of. The World Bank is putting together its Africa Mineral Geoscience Initiative, which aims at putting $1 billion into exploration activities in Africa. If we finally summarize this political part here, initiatives here, I would say that the Chinese initiatives are at a very early stage. I think we will see more concerted efforts into Africa by Chinese central governments, much more than we have seen so far. The EU is reviewing its policies. It doesn't really know on which leg to stand, so to say. But it's clear that also from the European Union there will be more interest in making sure that exploration and mining in Africa is progressing, trying to secure the demands of European industry. The AMDC, the African Mineral Development Center, I've already discussed that, and I think these political initiatives on top of the demand for metals, hence the demand for exploration, will give opportunities to redefine Africa's role and change the decline that I showed you initially to a more of an expansion. Let me finally look a bit into the future here, and I must say that analyzing future exploration levels is fairly easy compared to looking at metal prices, etc. In the sense, at least theoretically, there is a close relation between metal prices and exploration activities. And here we've tried to make a picture of what we believe. This is an index that Raw Materials Group puts together. We believe that we will see in 2013 a slight upturn in metal prices and then a slight downturn, but it will stay on a fairly high level. And this means that exploration will probably continue at the level we have seen in recent years, between 2.5 and 3 billion US dollars in Africa. Thank you. So my conclusions here are really to summarize, and what I'd like you to bring home is that the potential of Africa is really there, and that's not only on a sort of a geological basis, but also analyzing the drilling activities and reserve and resource developments, as I showed you. The activities are increasing, although from a fairly low level, but steadily over the years. So the level of exploration is now higher related to the total world than Africa's share of mineral production, indicating a continued growth in mine production in Africa. South Africa has lost its dominant role here, and it's West Africa, where both iron ore projects and gold projects are very dynamic, creating a dynamic situation. The political interest, both from within Africa and from other parts of the world, will certainly help developments. And I must say, I believe there is a window of opportunity now when prices are high, and that offers a very exciting future for African exploration. Thank you very much.